a medieval pilgrimage could take weeks or months. There were few shortcuts, and even fewer maps made for pilgrims. For much of the Middle Ages, literate or not, everyone knew the route to Compostela. In fact, the path would often be marked with small stones or pieces of colored cloth tied to trees along the roadside. At the beginning of the journey, pilgrims would purify themselves in a ritual bath and don new garments. They might also shed their worldly belongings, leaving them with a few basic items of clothing: food, a staff, and a pouch containing provisions and coins. Most pilgrims walked barefoot, taking off their shoes before the start of the journey and painfully relearning their shape weeks later. Since shoes had been largely absent from their lives, those who chose to wear footwear usually favored practical but ill-fitting boots that pinched their toes or rubbed blisters on their heels. To avoid being caught without sustenance, many pilgrims carried a loaf of bread and a gourd of wine, staples of medieval peasant life. Wine was more than just drinkable. Its sour tang and rough texture helped preserve any water it mixed with, killing most of the bacteria that made people sick. Once they started walking, however, supplies were limited. So pilgrims rationed their food, stretching it out over several days. Each evening, they looked for somewhere to sleep, huddling together for warmth against the damp chill of the night. While some stayed in monasteries or the homes of sympathetic villagers, many slept in the open, sharing what little food they had with passing beggars and making what music they could around a dying fire. Now, let's continue our story. You arrived at the Abbey Gate in the late afternoon. After a day's march, you watched other pilgrims trudge through, their bodies grimy, faces drawn, eyes shining with a fanatic light. Their presence did not trouble the monks inside, though. Such sights were commonplace. With a last glance at the weary travelers outside, you entered the cool shade of the cloister. As the sun dipped below the horizon, you knelt on a cold stone floor and prayed, thanking God for bringing you safely this far on your journey. All around you, other pilgrims prayed, too, murmuring thanks or confessing secret sins. The clatter of metal on stone filled the twilight as a blacksmith outside hammered his hot iron into shape. Within the abbey walls, monks moved silently, gathering for their evening meal. Before the first bite, an old monk with gentle eyes raised a wooden bowl of stew. His voice, though soft, boomed across the silent hall. Thanks be to God for sustaining us and for giving us this day, this food, and this fellowship. You raise your own meager portion of bread in reply, catching the eye of a young novice whose cheeks are still round and unlined. He smiles shyly and looks away. Later, after bowls are cleared and the remaining broth lapped up, you help clear the hall of scraps while the monks file out to attend vespers. Evening prayer echoes across the cloisters, weaving itself into the shadows. Then, when the sky is black with stars and the first lanterns are lit within the great church, you join the line of pilgrims filing past the high altar. One by one, you kneel before the cross and make your confession. A kind priest listens patiently, then offers a murmured prayer and a gentle absolution. Finally, you step out of the cool darkness of the church into the night. Sleep is hours away, but the road is long, and you must rest now. A low stone wall borders the courtyard. You rest your head against its rough surface and look up at the endless sky. High above, a lone star streaks across the blackness, leaving a silver trail in its wake. Slowly the night cools you, and the dark gathers at your eyelids. So you sleep, dreaming of home and the road ahead. This is the end of part 2, but our story continues next week. If you want to join us, stay tuned. In the Christian tradition, a pilgrimage is more than a journey across miles of land or sea. It is a quest for wholeness, a search for the sacred. But the path is seldom easy. And in the Middle Ages, when the road to salvation was fraught with peril, the greatest test of a pilgrim's faith was often not the journey itself, but the return. For it was here, among the familiar sights and sounds of home, that the true struggle began. To hold on to the vision, to keep the sacred in the ordinary. Now that your feet are sore and your mind quieted from the road, let us turn away from the path for a moment and step softly into the life of one of the most curious pilgrims in medieval history, Margery Kempe. Born around the year 1373 in the bustling English town of King's Lynn, Margery was no noble nor nun, but a brewer's wife. mother of 14 children, and a woman with a secret, burning vision of the divine. Her early life was neither peaceful nor pious. After the birth of her first child, Margery says she was seized by terrible visions. Devils surrounding her bed, clawing at her, mocking her, tempting her toward despair. She claimed she was on the edge of madness until Christ himself appeared at her bedside and forgave her sins. From that moment on, Margery's life became a winding pilgrimage of its own, a restless soul pulled between the worldly and the spiritual, the loud and the silent, the mocked and the holy. She dressed in white, a sign of chastity, even though she was a married woman. She wept uncontrollably in churches, on roadsides, and marketplaces. Sometimes she wailed so loudly during sermons that priests would ask her to leave. Her sobs were not small, discreet things, but great torrents of grief and ecstasy pouring from her as if from a wound. Some called her mad, others called her possessed. But Margery called herself a creature of God. She claimed that Jesus spoke to her often, not in distant riddles, but in familiar, intimate language. As a husband might speak to a wife, he told her to weep for the world, to travel, to write, and travel she did. Margery went on pilgrimage to Canterbury, York, Walsingham, Aachen, Rome, Jerusalem, and Santiago de Compostela. Not once, but several times, alone. As a woman, in an age where unaccompanied women were often suspect and rarely safe, she endured shipwrecks, illness, poverty, and the scorn of fellow pilgrims. She was arrested more than once, suspected of heresy, of madness, even of fraud. But she kept walking, kept weeping, kept praying. And all the while, she heard the voice of Jesus, urging her on, encouraging her, consoling her. It was a long and lonely road, but Margery was not alone. For in her grief, she found a strange solace. And in her isolation, she discovered a profound connection to the suffering Christ. In the Christian tradition, a pilgrimage is a journey toward healing. It is a quest for wholeness. And in Margery Kempe's story, we see that the path to healing is often through suffering. Yet even in the depths of her despair, Margery held fast to her vision, refusing to be silenced or subdued. And it is this persistence that makes her story so compelling. For Margery's pilgrimage was not just a physical journey, but a spiritual transformation. Through her tears, she was purified. Through her suffering, she was made whole. And in the end, it was her very ordinariness that made her extraordinary. She was not a queen or a saint, but a woman who wrestled with the everyday realities of life, who knew the pain of loss and the burden of grief, who understood the darkness of despair. Yet she never lost sight of the light, the guiding star that led her through the night. Was Margery touched by the divine? Was she mentally unwell? Was she both? What is certain is that she was a woman ahead of her time. A woman who dared to follow her heart and her vision, who refused to be bound by the expectations of her age. And in doing so, she left an indelible mark on history. In the hush of the night, as you drift further into stillness, you might hear the faint echo of her sobbing prayers trailing off into the dark. Somewhere between a cathedral and a crossroads, where certainty dissolves into faith. I've been your guide. Till next time, may your journey be swift and your burdens light. From Santiago de Compostela, we travel north to Dublin, Ireland. Here, in the heart of the city, stands what may be the oldest church in Ireland, built by the Anglo-Saxons in the 12th century. It too is dedicated to St. James, and within it, a special relic, the Book of Kells. Now, this isn't just any book. This is an illuminated manuscript, one of 4 great ones created in the early medieval period. And this one is the best preserved. Its pages contain the 4 Gospels of the New Testament, written in Latin, but that's not the interesting part. What makes the Book of Kells so remarkable is that it was produced by monks living in a small community on the remote island of Iona. And to get there, they had to row out every day from the mainland, battling wind and waves, because this was a holy site already associated with St. Columba, a missionary who arrived here in the 6th century. He brought Christianity to Scotland and converted its people away from paganism. But soon after, the island became a target of Viking raids and war. So the monks packed up their books and their faith and fled to the safety of the mainland. They didn't stay still long, though. Eventually they made their way to a new island, building a monastery here in the 7th century. It became a place of peace and solitude and study. Scholars came from all over Europe to read the scriptures and copy ancient texts. This was the School of Kells, and it was here that sometime before 800 AD, someone began the work of copying and illustrating the four Gospels. The artist or artists would have used quill pens made from bird feathers and ink made from berries and minerals. The vellum was imported from France. The painstaking work took several generations, perhaps as many as 200 years. Each page was decorated with elaborate borders, each filled with beasts and plants and knots and swirls. All told, there are some 300 full-page illustrations and 68,000 words. Today, these manuscripts are considered priceless treasures. They demonstrate a level of artistry unknown outside the court of Charlemagne. And yet they were made in a place of solitude, far from the centers of learning in Europe at the time. But why? Why make such beautiful art in such a dangerous place? The answer, like the paintings, lies in the details. Along the edges of the text, between the lines and within the letters, animals take shape. Snakes and birds, fish and lizards, real and mythical, weaving together to form a kind of protective barrier around the words. On the last page, two birds face each other, their beaks touching. They seem to guard the final word, amen. Together, they form a kind of prayer, a plea for protection against those who would do harm. The Book of Kells is an example of something called insular art. It blends Celtic designs with Christian iconography. Look closely at the spirals and curves. They have echoes in the Celtic braids worn by Pictish warriors. Look at the symmetrical patterns, repeated in the architecture of Newgrange and other passage tombs from the Bronze Age. And look at the zoomorphic heads, the creatures peering out with solemn eyes. They too are Pictish, representing clans and families. These early Christians were bringing their cultural identity into the church. They weren't giving up their heritage, but adding to it. These monks were not just praying, they were creating, building, illuminating, in effect, fighting back against the darkness by making beauty. And as you turn the pages of this ancient book, you can feel their presence in the quiet of the room. You can almost hear the scratch of their quills on the vellum. You can almost see the dust motes dancing in the single ray of light. And as you look up from the page, you can almost believe that the birds have wings. We've been walking all week on what would have been the last stage of the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in medieval France, and we've had quite an adventure. Our feet are blistered. We've been rained on, snowed on, sunburned. We've slept under the stars and woken up in cow pastures. And along the way, we've met all kinds of people, haven't we? No. Fellow pilgrims, innkeepers, a murderous gang of brigands, a kindly old hermit, and even a few angels, if we were lucky. But I think it's time now for one last stop on our journey. Somewhere very different from the dusty roads and bustling towns we've been traveling through. Let us step quietly into a different kind of world. Away from the dust and chaos of the road, beyond the bustle of towns and marketplaces, into the hushed stillness of stone-walled sanctuaries. Imagine you are now inside a Benedictine monastery, somewhere in the hills of medieval France. The sun has not yet risen. A bell tolls softly. Not a jarring sound, but a low, gentle tone that seems to fold into the silence. You rise from a wooden cot in a cold cell, your blanket coarse but clean. You say a brief prayer. You wash your face with cold water from a basin. Then you walk in quiet procession, candle in hand, to matins, the first service of the day held before dawn. Life here is not easy, but it is peaceful. Your day is divided into strict intervals: prayer, study, labor, meals, and sleep. The rule of Saint Benedict governs every hour, every gesture. Even your speech is limited. Silence is sacred. Words are used with care. Are you a scribe? You might spend hours bent over parchment, copying sacred texts by hand. Every letter a form of worship. The room is dim, lit by small, high windows. Ink stains your fingers. Your mind drifts with the rhythm of the lines. Or perhaps you work the gardens or tend the livestock, pulling weeds, feeding hens, mending fences. The scent of earth and herbs is everywhere. Meals are plain: lentils, bread, cheese, maybe a little fish on holy days. They are eaten in silence while a single monk reads aloud from scripture. But even in this controlled rhythm, the monastery offers something few others had in the Middle Ages. Stability. You are less likely to starve or be conscripted or swept away by war. Monks also preserved knowledge, not just religious but medical, astronomical, literary. In many ways, the quiet scribes of these cloisters kept the flame of civilization burning through dark times. Still, this life was not for everyone. The vows were lifelong. There were moments of doubt, of longing, but there was also music. Soft chants that filled the chapel at Vespers as the sun dipped behind the hills. There was the warmth of shared purpose, and there was time, precious time, to reflect, to read, to pray. And as the final bell rang at Compline and the brothers returned to their cells, sleep came not with noise, but with stillness. A stillness not so different from the one that now surrounds you. You've traveled far tonight. From the blistered feet of a dusty pilgrim to the quiet longing of a cloistered monk, you've stepped into the lives of kings and commoners, walked alongside the devout and the doubtful, traced the mysteries buried beneath cathedrals and bones. And now, as the present folds gently over the past, you can rest. The world you live in may be noisy, uncertain, fast, but for a moment, you have breathed the slower air of history. Close your eyes, if they're not already closed. Let the distant echoes of stone halls and winding paths fade into silence, and drift, softly, gently into sleep. Good night, traveler, and thank you for wandering through time with us. If you enjoyed this journey through time, please remember to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thanks for coming on this adventure with us. Till next time.